Hello and welcome. My name is Jeff Malone. I'm the CEO of BioMelbourne Network, and welcome to the Singapore Asia Pacific Trade Mission event. We're going to give everyone another 30 seconds to a minute to settle in, and then we'll formally commence. So thanks. All right. So once again, hello and welcome to our BioForum Trade Mission, startups, accelerators, service providers, connecting the ecosystems between Singapore, Asia Pacific, and Australia, how to access and benefit from the trade mission. My name is Jeff Malone. I'm the CEO of BioMelbourne Network, and it's my great pleasure to be here to host this discussion today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their continued connections to land, sea, and culture. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be online today. I'm personally joining you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. As you're probably aware, this trade mission is slightly different to the ones BioMelbourne Network have run in the past, and it's a program of both online and face-to-face events. And this is the second in our online sessions, with one more to come in late November. In our first event, we had the opportunity to gain a broader understanding of the two ecosystems, their scope and scale, and generally how they operate, hearing directly from each of the trade mission's key stakeholders shown that we'll show you or remind you of towards the end. If you didn't have a chance to see this first event, we'll send the links to it to you to view at your leisure, and we'll be able to also add this to the Singapore Trade Mission webpage on the BioMelbourne website for future reference. This is the second of 3 virtual events, again, related to the trade mission. This session will involve hearing in more detail about the lived experience of companies in Singapore, Asia Pacific, who have worked with the Victorian sector, and about the need and interest in creating a bridge between our ecosystems. We'll also hear directly from the services sector in more detail about the capabilities of the Victorian sector and the great depth of experience working with overseas clients. This is an opportunity to hear directly from MedTech companies and accelerator support programs in Singapore, and from, again, these sector partners here in Victoria. So the kind of questions: what are the needs and expectation of regional startups from the support sector? What service support can startups in Singapore and Asia Pacific businesses expect from the sector here? And what is their experience, lived experience in having done so in the past? So we'll share a case study. Amrish Nair is going to join us to share a case study from his company BioRhythm, who's effectively navigating this process at the moment. Following this, we'll be holding a trade mission briefing for Switch in Singapore with InvestVic and Global Vic. This will include a comprehensive information about travel and offer time for a Q&A. Only participants who are either traveling to, Victorian participants who are traveling to Singapore or want to stay on and connect with some of those folks to learn a little bit more about that office are happy to have you stay on. Video links to our event today will be provided to all participants who've registered, and will later be made available again on our Trade Mission website, as well will the Q&A session for the Trade Mission be provided. Before we get to our speakers, it's worth taking another moment to outline activities we've been undertaking to help us make this trade mission successful, whether companies are traveling to Singapore or are participating entirely virtually. First, trade mission participants provided information about themselves and their companies, their products and services during the EOI process, and a full summary of all the information has been provided to the trade mission participants on both sides in advance of this event. If you haven't received this information, please contact Donnelly or myself, and we can forward this on to you. The purpose of this is to enable you to research the other trade mission participants and connect with them directly. If you're heading to Singapore, you can potentially reach out and set up a meeting while you're up there, or if you're not going on this trip, reach out, start a conversation, explore opportunities. BioMelbourne Network can also help support facilitated the introductions as required. But we don't want to stop there. We want to create a lasting bridge between Singapore Asia Pacific and the Victorian services sector. And to support this, we've developed a new digital community platform for the life science sector, and we're calling that new platform Willem. So Willem means home in the local Wurundjeri language. Let's see, I'm going to show you a brief video. And so if Joe can try and bring that up. And we'll watch this video briefly, and then I'll take you through a little bit more about Willem on the other side.
Australia's life sciences industry has a new home. One place that brings us all together. Willem.
Willem is the new digital community platform where you and your organization can find and be found. A place to start a discussion, to share your knowledge.
Connect with your industry. Search for businesses.
And we're inviting you to join us.
Willem offers a living database of peers and potential partners, an introduction to relevant people and organisations, a network to support ideas and encourage success.
Willem is for individuals, organizations, startups to global enterprises.
For manufacturers, universities, researchers and the service sector.
Together, let's build something remarkable. Together, let's reimagine engagement.
If your industry is life sciences, your home is Willem.
So through Willem, we're going to establish a community where the Australian life sciences can connect with each other locally and also internationally. And it makes an ideal place to create a space within that for the trade mission, so we can create different communities within the Willem platform itself. And it's a place where you can communicate, you can ask questions, you can search for other companies who are involved in the community to connect with them. While this current trade mission will help us kick off this new ecosystem bridge, bringing in participants from both Singapore, Asia Pacific, and Victoria, it will not end once this existing trade mission ends after the last event in late November. So we want to encourage more MedTech companies to join over time from the region and more service providers in Victoria to also participate. The lasting bridge means you can continue to reach out, get conversations going. It's a full searchable database of all the other participants that you can start to connect with and learn about, and supports the kind of activities you might do at a conference where you'd ask people questions and you'd search for resources and you'd get references and the like. Just as a reminder, the participation in Willem is free. It's at no charge, and you can maintain that that connection and that account on an ongoing basis. And as you change roles or change companies, that account stays with you. InvestVic, though, is also focusing their activities during the Switch conference on MedTech to encourage MedTech companies in Singapore to participate in this activity. So we'll be encouraging them also to register and join the Willem Trade Mission community while we're in Singapore next week, and hope to garner additional companies into the area. I'd like to take a moment to remind you about the key trade mission participants. Joe, if we could show that last slide. Our sincere thanks to each of them for the time, energy, and overall support they provided. Of course, a special thanks to our sponsor, the State Government of Victoria and Global Victoria. Of course, we also partnered with InvestVic around the Switch conference. And thank you, of course, to all of our members, colleagues, all of our speakers, presenters who have really, joined us from all over the world and interrupted their busy schedules to come and speak to us today. So, and of course, to all of our trade mission participants joining online, thank you for joining from wherever you may be today. In terms of housekeeping, attendees have been muted for the duration of the events. However, we do encourage you to submit questions or comments for our speakers during the Q&A function via the Q&A function, and do so throughout the event. We'll try and address as many as we can towards the end of the discussion. Following this 90-minute event, we have a pre-travel briefing session planned with Global Victoria and InvestVic. to answer any questions delegates traveling to Singapore may have, or those interested in just learning more about the team up there. So stay on if that pertains to you. As usual, we're recording these sessions once again, so we'll be able to make these available to you after this. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Gary Haywood. So Gary is the Business Development Manager at Design Industry. He has over 30 years of experience in product design and business development. His expertise spans several skills, including sales, marketing, business development, project and stakeholder management, design-led product design, manufacturing, and delivery, and has a great depth of knowledge specifically in MedTech. D&I is a leading product design consultancy in Australia, and delivering turnkey solutions for their customers to build lasting businesses and robust brands. So welcome to the event, Gary. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll just share screen. I've just a few slides about design and industry, just for those of you that aren't aware of the company and who we are. So we're a design and engineering development studio with 3 studios. We've been in design and development for 35 years now, and we've grown the team to 65 members in all, with the 3 studio locations being in Melbourne, Sydney, and Newcastle. We have a really strong history of achieving industry awards, and about a third of our business is created from export income, which I'll elaborate a little bit on, obviously, during the course of this presentation. And we achieve a very high success rate in getting our products out and into the market. We're very proud of our success rate. So we're ISO accredited for ISO 13485 accredited for medical device development. And this device here is the Inventia Rustrum 3D bioprinter, which is a device that won the 2019 Australian Good Design of the Year award, which we're very proud of. And this year we were very successful as well in picking up the Good Design of the Year award for the advanced cell isotope generating machine, which was developed by our Newcastle studio in collaboration with the University of Newcastle. The technology was spun out of the University of Newcastle. So we're very proud of our achievements within the Good Design Awards. But as I mentioned before, we've a long history of doing work for offshore clients within the Southeast Asia region, within North America, and also within Europe. So we've enjoyed a strong relationship that continues today with Chattanooga in the USA over 20 years now, which involves us working very closely with their development team and integrating with their own in-house capabilities with our own. And we're constantly doing work for them on an ongoing basis with them in North America. And of course, with Singapore, we've got strong connections there, and we continue to grow those connections within the Singapore market as well too. So Amresh will be talking about with us. So we'll be talking later on during the course of this presentation, but we do work with startups as well as multinational companies as well. So to more about the topic of today, about how we've achieved the success. I suppose the short answer is it takes time. There's no real shortcut into actually developing export market, particularly when it comes to the export of services or equivalent, as opposed to goods and hard goods. D&I's enjoyed relationships throughout Southeast Asia, including Singapore and into Malaysia through Johor and Penang, with downstream value-adding services as part of our product development package. And that includes everything from tooling manufacturer, prototyping, right through to introducing clients and setting up production facilities offshore. Similarly, with local manufacturers, increasingly they have a hybrid offering, if you like, to the market, to our sector, where they're managing a lot of the local production and manufacture, but it's combined with a range of offshore capabilities as well, which we obviously tend to integrate with clients as well. So my point is that the relationships that we've had throughout the Singapore and Southeast Asia region go back many decades, and they've developed over a long period of time to where we are now within that market. And those relationships have been critical to us getting to where we are. Often it's those referrals from some of those people that are established and well respected over time that have made a huge difference into our success in actually achieving the next level of engagement, which is actually doing design and development work within the region. So without harping on about it, from a niche marketing perspective, I can't stress enough the importance of understanding and having a really strong appreciation for the local ecosystem and all of the drivers to make those relationships work. So we engage very strongly with government bodies to make sure that we're very clear on what some of the broader economic drivers are within those economies, both here in Victoria and Australia and Singapore, and where we can complement them, because the governments are clearly a very strong stakeholder in those ecosystems, and we need their support. So it's great to see this initiative actually kicking off and hearing commentary between, very senior members of government to actually try and make that relationship more seamless, because we're fully supportive of the economic motivations of both economies and what they're trying to achieve. And it's obviously very much about local evaluating and local capability development. So what's really important from a success perspective is that you have a very healthy respect for how your capabilities can be shared, how you can collaborate within those ecosystems and benefit for all, so that you're doing commercially sound business in those sectors. But at the same time too, you're very mindful of the broader economic goals of the jurisdictions and the people involved. So one of the important things from our perspective over the course of particularly the last 5 years, I guess, would be is we've achieved the ISO 13485. We were developing the process over quite a number of years, 5 to 7 years, of actually getting ISO 13485. That's certainly been a critical element to us having a unique selling proposition and being able to position ourselves well with a need within both of those sectors. COVID has actually been a very successful period for us. The team has grown 30%. We've put on an extra studio. And we've found also too, as a side issue, that a lot of remote working, be it domestically as well as internationally, has become increasingly seamless. And I'm sure we've all seen that with the uptake of video conferences such as these now, that once you overcome the time differences, Zoom conferencing is as simple as making a phone call, and in some instances it's preferred. So we continue to try and evolve that relationship that we can have meetings such as this in a meeting room with people across the other side of the globe and discuss as if they're very much in the same room. So that's definitely been something that has accelerated our success over the course of the last few years and attributed to our growth. And I think also what's really important from a point of view of the broader offering to the market, one of the real benefits of this type of initiative that Jeff's working on here and the government is that it is very much about a broader ecosystem. And as part of our, particularly our sector in product and hardware development, having those concurrent streams of compliance and regulatory investment, business and manufacturing streams interwoven within the development program is really a critical means of making those processes much more efficient. And so we strongly support the opportunity of collaborating both with the value-adding and concurrent streams that are involved in that, but also some of the programs such as the accelerators and the incubators out there. We obviously collaborate very strongly with them and do everything we can to try and support their activities, so that we've got a really strong pipeline of early stage projects coming through, where our expertise and our network of connections can really support some of their advancement, further into product development and obviously hopefully onto production. So in a nutshell, it's a case of it takes time. It really is a case of understanding that broader ecosystem, all of those concurrent streams. You must have the right product to align with your niche within those markets and those sectors if you really want to carry it off seamlessly. Best of luck to everybody. We look forward to meeting people on the mission next week. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Gary. And yeah, it really does take a whole ecosystem to make all these things successful, and companies who are attracted here are looking for that breadth and depth of support, from clinical trials to, as you said, regulatory and investment and business strategy and all the other things that are needed. And of course, the manufacturing and prototyping. And if you look at the trade mission participants that we've got, and again, that list has been sent out, you can actually run down there and see those elements pointed out very clearly. And that's just a touch point on the whole ecosystem that we've got here. So thanks, really appreciate that, Gary. And that's sets the stage. I'm going to now introduce Angela Luddick. Angela is Executive Vice President and co-founder at 360 Biolabs, a bioagilitics company. As co-founder and executive director, Angela leads a business development and future expansion activities. Angela has extensive drug discovery and pharmaceutical experience as well, and expertise in early phase drug discovery through to IND filing. She has background in virology combined with technical expertise and business acumen. So over to you, Angela.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to take a little bit of a step change away from the topics that Gary was talking about and really focus on the clinical trial sector in Australia. As you would be aware, Australia is one of the preferred jurisdictions for clinical trials in the world. Mostly early phase. We do a lot of early phase work, but we also do disease state and patient studies as well, and can do phase 2, phase 3. The strength in the sector in Australia is that we have a very sophisticated network. So when I say sophisticated, we have 5 well-established phase 1 units in Australia that do healthy volunteer plus disease state clinical trials. We have over 100 sites in Australia that can do your patient clinical trials as well. We have a very well-established clinical CRO network. You'd be aware of some of the global clinical CROs that will include Novatech, IQVIA, Avance, PPD, Icon, George Clinical, TigerMed, just to name a few, and sorry for those that I've missed, but also some ones in Australia that really focus on phase 1s only and don't have that global footprint. Southern Star Research, Beyond Drug Development, Molecules to Market, Eurotrials Australia. So, just mentioning those 10 or 12 companies, you can see that the clinical CRO network in Australia is really, really quite diverse and very well established. When it comes to laboratories, we also have a number of laboratories in Australia that can support PK and PK endpoints in clinical trials. Obviously, 360 Biolabs is one of those laboratories. And in Australia, there's not one single service provider that can provide all of that solution for you. So we work in a very collaborative way. You will see us often work together with a clinical CRO, with a phase 1 unit, with a site, as well as labs to provide that full solution for you for that clinical trial. So we'd also be aware that Australia often sells 3 key advantages to doing clinical trials in Australia, and that is speed, cost, and quality. I'm going to touch on speed and quality, and I'm going to leave my colleague Blair from Acclaim to discuss cost. But when it comes to speed, you will hear us describe our regulatory environment as very fast compared to the US in particular. So you don't need an IND when you're doing a clinical trial in Australia. You need no GMP certificate when you're doing a clinical trial in Australia. And we have our HREC committees. You might know them as IRBs, but we have our HREC committees review your data package and deem a product safe or a therapeutic safe to go into first in human clinical trials. Our TGA, which is like the FDA in the US or the EMA in Europe, is then notified that the clinical trial will take place, but it's not a process where they need to approve that clinical trial. That whole process sits with our HREC committees. And so the speed with which our HREC committees can approve programs, because they meet on a weekly and a fortnightly basis, can mean that you can get into your first in human clinical trial in 8 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks. That's specific for a healthy volunteer population study. For therapeutic areas, sometimes it's sort of 3 to 4 months because it involves a number of different sites that need to get involved and sign contracts and etc. So you can see that regulatory environment and that speed advantage is really because the regulatory system in Australia really works quite differently. I'm also going to touch on quality. So quality is obviously closer to my heart, being in labs, Australia is part of ICH, so everyone will be aware there's 16, 18 countries globally that are part of ICH. And what that means is there's a mutual acceptance of data. So that means the FDA accepts Australian or data that comes from Australia. So does the EMA. Australia and the TGA also accepts data that comes from the FDA. But what that means is every clinical trial that gets conducted in Australia, all that data can be accepted by global regulatory bodies, which means that you don't have to repeat any of your clinical trial in the US if you're going for a US market. It means that all of that data can then be used to file your IND. And we often see this situation with biotech companies where they will file an IND in the US, they will come and conduct their first in-human clinical trial in Australia. A standard sort of healthy volunteer SAD/MAD study can be conducted in a 6 to 9 month period. And often once the IND is approved in the US, they will come out the other side also with phase 1 clinical data as well. So that speed advantage is really attractive to smaller biotech companies who not necessarily have a huge funding behind them. But it's just one of those advantages that really makes Australia very attractive to conduct clinical trials. 360 Biolabs itself is the most diverse specialty lab in Australia, the most expansive. We're lucky enough to have more recently be merged with BioAgilytics in the USA, which means that we can conduct your phase 1 clinical trial in Australia, establish your assays that are specific for your therapeutic, also do your sample analysis. And then once you start branching out into the US, you can still utilize our global labs. We can transfer our assays across to our US team in a very seamless manner with SOPs that are already harmonized, and then conduct your phase 2 clinical trial using that same level of expertise. So there's really great advantages of being able to use 360 Biolabs in Australia and transition that through. I think the clientele that come to Australia are a lot of US, but also a lot of APAC. 360 Biolabs themselves has a 40% clientele from APAC, and those countries includes Singapore, also South Korea, Taiwan, and China. So Australia is really a well-worn path, a well-trodden path for APAC countries conducting clinical trials. And I think I just encourage you to continue reaching out to us and ask all your questions. I know the time differences are great to work between Singapore and Australia, so there's not really too many barriers. And just ask away all your questions over the coming times that we're going to be together. Also face-to-face in Singapore. My team will be in Singapore next week, and we look forward to supporting you if you'd like to conduct your clinical trials in Australia.
Thanks, Angela, and that was a really great summary, and I appreciate the sort of broader overview. And thinking back to what Gary was talking about, I mean, the ability of the design companies, because Victoria has probably close to 47%, I think, of the research and development funding in Australia comes into Victoria. And we have the most sort of the broadest ecosystem here around the country by a long shot. But we also, if you're trying to get into clinical trials and you're looking at your product design, you've really got to make sure that you can produce a product that you can use in clinical trials. You've got the usability, you've got the capability, and you really have the understanding of what the features needed to be for that. And that we've got DNI, we've got Hydrix, we've got 3 or 4 or 5 other really good product design development groups here, and each have different specialties, et cetera. And again, this is part of building that, raising that awareness within Singapore Asia Pacific of the broad capabilities we've got here. So once again, Angela, I really appreciate it. Now I'd like to introduce Blair Lucas. Blair is co-founder, partner, and group commercial director for Climb. As partner and group commercial director, Blair is responsible for the overall operation of Climb Australia. He applies his in-depth knowledge of the Australian corporate regulatory environment to help offshore companies establish a presence in Australia, and is well versed in the R&D tax incentive program designed to encourage companies to conduct eligible R&D activities here in Australia. And with that, Blair, over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to attend this webinar presentation on the opportunities that are available in Australia. Following on from what Ange mentioned, we all work together closely in a very collaborative environment, ensuring that we can cover off all of the requirements for companies who are looking to enter the Australian market, whether it is to conduct R&D or to engage in sales or manufacturing their products. But specifically at Climb, we do everything that's not science related, which is that we set up companies in Australia for businesses that are looking to enter this market. And alongside my colleagues here, specifically within the life science space, we are very strong in supporting life science companies that are looking to conduct R&D in Australia via my learned colleagues here, and in doing so access the R&D tax incentive. So I've got a very brief presentation to give you some background as to how the R&D tax incentive works. Bear with me one second. So generally, companies that are coming to Australia are looking to access Australia by way of the speed, the cost and the quality that was referred to previously. But there is a very generous benefit that's available to companies that are also conducting eligible R&D in Australia. This slide's very confusing. This is one of those legal slides we need to put up to describe how exactly it works. But essentially, to break it down to something that makes sense, what does that actually mean? Where a company has a global group turnover of less than 20 million Australian dollars, you can obtain up to a 43.5% cash refund on your eligible R&D activities. Where you have a global group turnover of more than $20 million, you can obtain a 38.5 to 46.5 tax offset. That tax offset's pretty familiar to most companies that are looking to do R&D. It's a tax credit available in most countries in the world. It is the less than $20 million 43.5% cash refund that is really different in terms of how Australia can support eligible R&D activities. And this is utilised by a wide variety of companies. Climb Australia itself currently supports, as of this morning, 178 companies in Australia that are doing R&D and accessing the R&D tax incentive via this program. The way it works in terms of that global group turnover question is really the critical question here. It doesn't matter how much global group turnover you have. If you're conducting eligible R&D in Australia, you will be eligible for the R&D tax incentive. But if you want to get that cash rebate, you need to be under $20 million in a financial year. And when calculating that global group turnover question, you need to look at the structure of your companies worldwide, your total group in terms of how you operate. So as you can see here on the left, the Australian subsidiary that you set up will have no revenue, normally, if it's just conducting R&D. So if your parent company overseas has less than $20 million in revenue, combined, you qualify. The second target that you can see, however, you need to make sure you consider any shareholder of your parent company that holds more than 40% of the shares. So where you have a shareholder with less than 40% of ownership, but it has greater than $20 million of revenue, that's fine. So you need to look at your parent company's shareholder register, the cap table, and see, do you have any shareholders with more than 40% ownership? If you do, if you do have them with more than 40% ownership and they have more than $20 million in revenue, unfortunately, your total aggregated global revenue will be more than $20 million and you won't access the R&D tax incentives cash rebate. You'll only be eligible for the tax credit. So the way we look at this with our clients is look at your cap table overseas, there in Singapore, look at whether you have any shareholders with more than 40% ownership, and then consider what their revenue position is, because that will define whether or not you are eligible for the cash rebate. Who's eligible? This is where we come into play, because you can access the speed, the cost and the quality of the Australian R&D life sciences clinical trial ecosystem directly by contracting from Singapore with my colleagues here on this call to do the work you need to do. But if you want to also access the R&D tax incentive, you must have a company in Australia. So this is what we do. Henceforth, why I said we don't do the science. We do all the tax, the accounting, the taxes, the legal, the boring stuff to make sure that you can have a company in Australia that is eligible for the R&D tax incentive. It can be 100% foreign owned by your Singaporean parent. There are limited minimum capital requirements. You need one share at $1. And it's really quick to set up. It takes around 4 weeks in total. For Singaporean companies, you'll be pleased to know that the Australian PTY Ltd is basically the same as the Singaporean PTE Ltd, and we have very much the same compliance requirements. It is one thing we can thank the British for in that regard, that we are very similar across the board. You need a resident director, you need a registered office. Accounting and tax requirements are very, very similar. So Singaporean companies looking to do this in Australia, you're going to find that it's a very familiar landscape. The parent company ideally should be located in a country with a double tax agreement, which includes Singapore, thankfully. So as long as you have your Singaporean company wholly owning your Australian subsidiary, conducting the R&D through that, you'll upfront be eligible. When we talk about activities that are eligible, there's two kinds: core R&D activities, supporting R&D activities. Core R&D activity, you must be conducting in Australia. It must be an experiment. And that is very, very, very clearly a clinical trial. In our now almost 13-year history, we've never had pushback from the regulatory authorities as to the eligibility of a clinical trial as a core R&D activity. So all of your costs that you pay to CROs for the work you're doing in Australia, all of the pass-through costs to clinical trial sites, all those costs will be eligible for the R&D tax incentive. But then on top of that, you have supporting R&D activities. And these are activities that are not necessarily experimental in nature, but are directly related to the core activity. So all of the lab work that you do with 360 Biolabs, it's not necessarily experimental, but it's eligible. Similarly, patient recruitment, it's not an experimental activity, it'll also be eligible. So you find that the entire scope of eligible R&D activities, and therefore the scope of eligible R&D costs, is very, very broad in Australia. Process is pretty straightforward. You conduct the activities, let's say in 2023. At the end of 2023, you then lodge an application with the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources to justify that you did conduct eligible R&D activities that year. Once that is processed, takes a couple of weeks. We then complete your financial statements for your Australian subsidiary, and we file the income tax return with the Australian Taxation Office. And the rebate's paid within 4 to 8 weeks. It's very, very quick. It's important to note that this is a self-assessed program. Only 2% of applications are actually audited each year. You tell the tax office how much you spent, you tell the tax office how much you should deserve back. Now, of course, you need to be honest, but nonetheless, this is why the process is so incredibly efficient. The funds that you receive, you can keep in Australia for further R&D work. You can repatriate them back to your parent company. They're your funds. There's no requirement to maintain those funds in Australia. Other key considerations, you need to spend a minimum of $20,000. That's normally not an issue in this industry. You've got a maximum of $150 million, so you've got a very high threshold there. That's an annual basis. The other point to note is that only activities, as I've mentioned, in Australia are eligible. If you wish to include costs for activities that are incurred overseas, they can sometimes be approved by the Department of Industry, but you need to make a specific application. It's time-consuming, it is costly, and of course, this is not self-assessed. This is an application for specific approval for costs related to activities overseas. Now, there's 3 criteria you have to fulfill just to even pass the minimum threshold here. The activities that are being conducted overseas must not be able to be conducted in Australia. So an example that I use there is primate tox studies, for example. We just don't do them in Australia. So that would pass the test for number 1. Number 2, the activities overseas must have a significant scientific link with the core activity in Australia. That's usually not hard to justify. And the third one is that the overseas expenditure for those activities must be less than the Australian expenditure. So where we often find challenges there is clients come to us and say, I could only identify 20 patients in Australia. I need another 100 patients overseas. That activity overseas is not going to be eligible because it will exceed the cost of the activities in Australia. That's all I got. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Blair. And that's you know, the design and clinical trials and services supporting those along with the R&D tax incentive have long been some of the key drivers to attract business into the ecosystem here, because it means that you've got the key things you need to then be successful and get your product development, your manufacturing, your prototypes, your clinical trials, and then again, wrapping the rest of the ecosystem around that to support the other things that those companies inevitably need. And we'll explain that, we'll explore that a little more in the Q&A at the end. I'd like to now turn to MedTech Actuator and Matthew Frith. Matthew is the Commercial and Partnership Director there. He works with his team to develop and drive the execution of strategies to ensure the long-term growth of the MedTech Actuator. This includes engaging with and supporting startup founders and developing and managing strategic relationships with key partners and stakeholders across the public policy, health, and innovation system. So with that, Matthew, over to you.
Fantastic, Jeff. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to jump on the second session here as part of the mission. It's great to be here and talk about MedTech Actuator as well. I'll zip through pretty quickly. I don't have a presentation to share with you today, but just to give you a quick introduction to us again. As an overall business, some of our activities around already, as Jeff mentioned, doing some connection across the ecosystem. So maybe just sharing some of that experience and talk about a particular initiative that we have running as well that may be of interest to some people. So just as a quick introduction, MedTech Actuator is Asia Pacific's health venture catalyst. We accelerate MedTech, health tech and biotech startups through a series of programs where we provide knowledge, connection to ecosystem partners and connection to capital as well. So our goal is really to accelerate the commercialization process. As many people have said, it's quite complicated. There's a number of aspects to it. It's quite unique for those of you that are in the sector or have done it before around just the level of complexity. So our job is to try and help iron that out, connect with a range of ecosystem partners. And I love some of the themes that have come out of this session with the discussions and stuff that Jeff talks about as well around collaboration and connection as well. That's certainly a big part of what we do too. We're in a bit of a unique position as well as part of this mission because we wear a couple of different hats. So of course we operate here with a head office out of Victoria, I guess as a local service provider as well. We also have an office based in Singapore where we've been established for a few years. We also have experience throughout other APAC countries as well in terms of exporting our services and programs. So we have run programs previously in Vietnam, some in India as well, and more recently in Japan too. So I can definitely appreciate and connect with some of the things that I know Gary was mentioning before as well around the importance of that local connection in and government support, local stakeholders too, and the time it takes to develop those ecosystems. So I'm really happy we've done a good job of that with Singapore, have a great relationship, and yeah, looking to build on that further. The other thing I wanted to touch on briefly around our side, and I guess why Victoria, we've heard some great, why Australia and why Victoria, and we've heard some great examples of that from the clinical side and some of the financial incentives around coming. But I just also want to touch on the startup ecosystem in particular, because I just to reinforce and acknowledge that you know, it's a very vibrant, growing, and probably the best startup ecosystem in the country, well supported through agencies such as LaunchVic. In fact, 1 in 5 startups in the sector here come from a life science or health background as well. Excuse me, my thing just cut off. And yeah, there's a fantastic community of different accelerators, maturing startups that'll feed back into that commercialization process. Even a lot of companies that have started very early and matured with us and gone on to get some really good funding and progress through later stages of their path to market. So that startup ecosystem is supported by accelerator programs such as ours and companies like And Health as well. So it's a very strong ecosystem from that startup perspective. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly as well is a program that we run. So we do, of course, have a program up in Singapore called Ascend, which is more for the local market. And that's something that we did, of course, to recognise the differences in the different needs of accelerating technologies, whether it be in Singapore or in Australia. So, of course, if you're Singapore-based and looking in Singapore, then I would definitely recommend you have a look at our website for the Ascend program. But for those companies that are a little more progressed and looking for entrance into Australia as well, we run our Global Navigator program, which is open for applications at the moment. And really that's providing a smooth and accelerated pathway for growing ventures to gain deep insight and access to critical stakeholders in the in the Australian ecosystem. So the program we have open at the moment, in fact, for Singapore-based companies, because we are supported by Enterprise Singapore Group to run this one as well. And so for Singapore-based companies, the program is usually $15,000, but there's a subsidy there if you have 30% shareholding in Singapore of $10,000. And that program brings you out to connect in with a range of different ecosystem partners, and where it works really, really well. So you're meeting some of them on the call today, the D&Is and places like that. So if you have a particular need and you know exactly what you want to go and connect with, then I think directly connecting with those companies is the right way to go. If you want a selection of different companies to meet with, a broader introduction to the ecosystem, yeah, our tour will take you across a couple of days in Sydney and also 3 in Victoria to connect in with a range of different stakeholders. So you get to meet a lot of different people. That's across PD firms, venture capital, other corporate partners as well. So I would highly encourage you to look at our site and check that one out. Otherwise, yeah, thanks, Jeff, for the opportunity to present again and another chance to connect. We love these opportunities that BioMelbourne Network provide, where they're providing another introduction platform for us to come together and share our insights from working already out of Singapore, but also to share a little bit more about us as a Victorian service provider and how we can assist you to come down here and connect more into the local ecosystem. So thanks so much, Jeff.
I really appreciate it, Matthew. And I've been working with MedTech Actuator for most of a decade, and certainly familiar with their programs, and they keep expanding and getting into new markets, and the offering around the Global Navigator is something we may touch on a little bit more in the Q&A, but really appreciate it. The Actuator is a great example of the ability to leverage off of the very collaborative ecosystem we have here. Because it is, you look around the trade mission participants, and a lot of them are people that are called on to come over and run a course on regulatory issues, or run a course on design, or connect up with their, their startups on whatever the service package is that they need. So it's been a core part of the ecosystem here, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to play that in a growing manner in the Asia Pacific region. With that, I'd like to switch over and introduce you to Amrish Nair. Amrish is the CEO and co-founder of BioRhythm, and he's joining us from Boston today. So he wins the Cupid Doll Prize for the staying up the latest to join us today. Although he reminds me that Singapore is just waking up, so his day doesn't get to end with this event. So as an engineering grad of Singapore's Nanyang Technological University, Amrish's research resulted in numerous international publications and a US patent on ECG signal analysis and monitoring. Research collaborations with cardiologist Dr. David Fu and his supervisor, Associate Professor Pina Marciano, led him to spin off BioRhythm, a MedTech startup providing cutting-edge signal processing solutions in the fields of remote monitoring and wearable technology. His company utilized the Australian biotech environment, and he'll share a little bit more about his experience with that and how he navigated sort of working between those different ecosystems. So over to you now, Amrish.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think we met in your previous life when you were DNI, but
that's right. Full disclosure, I was with DNI before this, although I've had many lives.
In case I've disclosed something, but yeah. No, very, very happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, for attending. These sort of events are so important to actually bring everyone together, right? And you need this sort of catalyst. And thanks, BioMelbourne Network, for being that sort of platform to bring everyone in. So I think, as Jeff mentioned, I'll just give a couple of minutes introduction to the company and then explain how we went along our journey in Australia. And so BioRhythm is developing a remote monitoring platform for pregnancy. Essentially, what we're looking at doing is bringing pregnancy care outside the hospital walls. And we're redesigning the experience. We're looking at how we can introduce easy to use devices that can provide clinical quality data that can basically provide low cost, high quality care. And that's an essential part of where we are right now post-COVID, because it gave us a chance to sort of reset, right? And looking at the way people pay, what people want, I think providing options in care is going to be one of the most essential things that we have going forward in order to right size our care so that we can bring healthcare bills down, but improve quality. And with that, what we've done is we've built a device that connects into a remote monitoring platform. And, we went along that journey with a number of partners in Australia, actually, not just one. We really started off with the clinical experience. We were piloted the project within Monash University. And as was mentioned before, right, we went through an IRB process for a device that looked kind of like a bomb when we first made it. I'm surprised I got it through immigration at some point, but it was, and that's where the journey started on how do we improve it, and how do we make it into a device that can be manufactured. With Monash, we actually we approached design and industry, and they were fantastic partners for us. For a couple of years, we went through a process of building it all the way from prototype all the way to final device. I have one here. And we are currently in clinical trials around the world, but all that sort of springboarded from Australia and the work we did there. And, D&I brought us through the process, right? It was starting with a prototype. How do we make 1, 10, 100? And, they really held a hand and helped us scale from there, because going through a design process iteratively together with the hospital, it's important to have the ecosystem close by. And I think that's an essential part of what Melbourne brings, or Victoria brings, to this whole equation, is you have a number of different ecosystem partners, and it's that ecosystem which provides the acceleration in product development, design, testing. And that's what we found. So at that point, when we were looking for it, Singapore lacked some of the ecosystem partners. And that's kind of where we looked outside. But, since emerged from Australia, the 2 years of COVID were pretty hard engaging with Australia, but we're now looking to re-engage. And like was mentioned, with clinical trials through R&D, but also through implementation. And it's the Melbourne ecosystem, I think, really helped us in that it was comprehensive enough for us to really go from that the box that we built, to a sophisticated design for manufacture medical device. And with D&I working with international contract manufacturers, they really taught us to focus on the right things, right? And the things that mattered, through an ISO process, labeling, packaging, and how do we keep our eye on the ball? And with Monash helping us get through that first 50 patients of data, I think that was absolutely quite critical. So I think you've heard different elements of this from previous speakers, all the way from the R&D tax incentive to the clinical trial network, to the product development, to having a R&D reimbursement framework in place. All this helps to accelerate the whole process. And I think Jeff touched on this as well when he said, you don't just have one world-class player in each, you have several world-class players in each category, from the design element, planet innovation, design industry, to the hospital networks, right? You have the University of Melbourne Hospital Network, you have the Monash Hospital Network, you have St. Vincent's. It's quite an incredible medical technology ecosystem that you have. So that's, from our perspective, we have absolutely no regrets, right? I think that that's one of the things that will be on people's minds. We have absolutely no regrets, and we would do it all over again in Melbourne. And I think that's the best endorsement I could give, because we've been to several other cities around the world, but we've not had quite the support and level of expertise that we've seen to get us through that phase of our development. So thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, and Amrish, I mean, we met a number of times over the years, both here and in Victoria and in Singapore. And so you got connected into, if I can just explore a little bit, you got connected into Monash. How did you first get connected to Monash?
So it was actually a mate of mine who studied with me in secondary school, and he was doing a PhD. He was looking to do a PhD in Monash, and I told him, well, I've got a whole PhD for you if you want it, right? And that's kind of how we got connected. But I think that brings me to a point of the clinical talent as well within the hospitals. It's the clinical and research talent. In most hospitals, you have very top heavy research talent, the stalwarts, the rock stars of the research world. But in Melbourne, what you have is such competition in the specialist positions that everyone does a crazy amount of research, and everyone's looking to publish. Everyone's looking to get in on the new technologies. So there's no shortage of talent when it comes to research in Australia. So I met it through a friend who wanted to do a PhD to stand out. He's done really well for himself since. He's still with us, and so yeah, that's kind of how I got introduced. It was very accidental. I suppose that's how a lot of these things happen. But yeah, like I said, we just took it and ran from there.
Yeah. So with once you, and again, I'm trying to help people, and part of the reason for today is really to help people understand that once you get into the ecosystem here, and I'm trying to explore the experience you had, is that people here are very collaborative. And that's unique here, even in Australia, to the level of collaboration between the various parts of the ecosystem. If you're working with one area and you need another resource, or you need another skill set, or you need to be connected with somebody, whoever that is, what's your experience with being able to reach out to that growing network you have and get that little extra assistance and find those resources that you need once you've got a toehold in one part of the ecosystem?
I think the two elements to that, and one of them is that just Melbourne and Victoria is quite dense in terms of their, it's quite densely populated with the ecosystem, right? It's not, everyone kind of knows each other. It's small enough. It's just small enough that, it's collaborative and it's a tight network. And I think that's important because when everyone knows each other, they can make good recommendations, right? They can actually suggest you go to the right people. And that's what happened with us with D+I. That's what happens with Monash. Just speak to the right people, and that's part of the way things get done faster, right? Is really about getting that connection right. And the second part of it is actually, the Victorian state government and Enterprise Singapore were actually quite involved in the whole process in terms of they were very, very available for conversations. They were very handy when it came to finding out the right schemes, the right programs, the right events that you needed to attend. So yeah, I think it benefits, Victoria benefits from the fact that it's slightly more concentrated in its population in and around Melbourne. There are other great areas as well. But the Melbourne ecosystem is very strong, very tight, very well connected amongst the different players. And even to that point, right? I mean, even competitors in the same industry will send you away to a competitor if they can't do the work for themselves, right? It's friendly but competitive. I think that's how I describe it. And that's a huge benefit to any company jumping in, right?
Well, and that's that serves as really the part of the baseline for why we're trying to set up this this digital community between the two ecosystems. And I'll drone on about it incessantly for the rest of my life, probably. But the having that Willem ecosystem community set up, and again, reminding everybody who's on here, you're able to get an account for free and come in and sit down in that room. And it's that place where you can ask questions. You can say, hey, I'm looking for such and such service, or I'm looking for somebody to connect me with X. And we can do that both ways. And it's hopefully that space, if people use it, to help start getting that toehold into Australia, or making those connections you need into Singapore. And I always describe the platform as I've created like a dance hall. I got the band, got some food, I got some lights, right? And the music's there, right? And but people have to get out and dance, and you'll do that at a conference, and that's kind of what we're trying to do, is set up a space that people can connect and find each other. And it's not LinkedIn where you have to directly connect to somebody. You'll be able to see everybody who's in that room and what their company is, what they do, and reach out to them directly or ask questions into the platform. So we're really encouraged that that's gonna really support the long-term communication and ecosystem development. I guess the last is for question I wanted to kind of explore with you, Amish, is are you a unicorn? Is Biorhythm like, well, there's Biorhythm, but there's not going to be other companies in Singapore we saw a few weeks back, we saw Enterprise Singapore and all the other stakeholder partners present their ecosystems. Would you consider yourself a massive outlier, or are there, in your experience and with your network there, are there others who are could be interested in really reaching out and participating? We've certainly got a range of companies already signed up with the trade mission, but I'm curious to hear it from yourself what your view is.
So yeah, I mean, when you mean unicorn, we're definitely not close to $1 billion. We're like we're so far away, it's unbelievable. But I mean, are we unique in that sense that we came to Australia looking for partnerships and help? I don't think so. I think in Singapore, I would say there are fewer startups with hardware requirements. So hence maybe people on our journey, maybe slightly fewer than software-only startups, especially in the MedTech space. If you're looking for machine learning-based image analysis startups, a number of them out there. If you're looking for hardware to software end-to-end, there are fewer, not to say they're few, but they're growing number, right? And all that grows with options that people have and how easily accessible this help is, right? So I think when we started, that was just what the ecosystem was. But now accessibility is a key point. We're able to find information so much easier on a lot of these partners. They have case studies, we worked with DNI really well. And so people have reference points on how they can engage the system. And so I think that makes life a lot easier for a founder nowadays if he or she wanted to go through a process, right? To develop hardware, to do clinical trials, whatever it is they need to do in Australia. So at least they're reference points, and a number of companies have done it. So it's not just us by any stretch of the imagination. The number of companies, Homage is there in a really big way. There's several great companies, Singaporean companies who are in the Australian market. So so Singaporean companies nowadays have several points of reference. It should be much easier to get information, especially with, like the BioMelbourne network and Enterprise Singapore and Westvic. So, yeah.
Oh, there's Amrish. Thank you very much for that.
Hey, thanks. We kind of froze for a while.
Yeah, I think we're all back, or Amrish, it's just you and I here talking to each other. Hopefully that's not the case. Now I think what we're going to do now, so we've got one more speaker who's coming on, but he'll be on in hopefully in just a few minutes. But I think what we'll do is open up to some questions. So let me I've got a few here. So I guess I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to bring kind of go around the room with Gary and Matthew and Blair and Angela a little bit. I guess one of the questions that I've got coming in is, what do you think when you see companies coming in to work in Victoria in Australia, while there is a broad ecosystem, what do you find as the top couple of things that really attract them in? Where do you see them most often finding their anchor point? And I'll maybe start with I don't know, Matthew's on my left. He's first in my window anyway. I'm going to start with Matthew in that order and just kind of move around. And so Matthew, what's your experience given the global?
Sure, no worries. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, look, I guess particularly if we're talking out of Singapore as well, one of the attractions, I guess, is the geographic proximity and then the cultural likeness to larger markets like the US in particular. So seeing it as a good step towards, and I think Angela spoke well around those compliance crossovers in larger markets. So seeing it as a good stepping stone to come in, culturally close to larger markets like the US, although there's of course a lot of differences as well, but giving them an opportunity a little bit close at home to come in and establish and get set up as well. So yeah, that's probably what we've seen most of and most of the interest. In addition, that there's a reasonable local market here as well, looking outside of Singapore, particularly on the different sectors. I'm talking a little bit later in another conference around digital health, and there's certainly a local appetite and local desire around investing into improving the healthcare system here in Australia as well. So there's a number of consumers here that want, and a lot of work we've got to do in our local health system around better innovation, application of technology, experience, better care in home, to help telehealth opportunities, so many others as well. So I think both the opportunity for the local market and then the opportunity to come and use it as a launchpad to other greater markets that have some similarities.
Great. Angela, I've got you next on my list.
Yeah, sure. So I think probably the main comment we get from our clients when they come and do on-site meetings and visits to 360 is the collaborative environment. So I had a client on site just a couple of weeks ago, and he said, the Australians are so easy to work with. They find a solution when they see a gap in a program, and they're more proactive than a lot of the service providers they've worked with. And this was a US client that they've specifically worked with previously. So, his love and his continuation of doing clinical trials in Australia will be just because of the collaborative environment that we keep all spruiking about. I mean, I've said it so many times over the last few years, but to have a client sit in a room with you and actually say back to you, that's exactly why we're continuing to do our clinical trials in Australia, was just a big tick and a big bonus for us.
Great. Gary.
Look, it's an interesting question, Jeff. I guess the normal business rules will always apply in businesses that we're involved in, where there's a high degree of trust. There's obviously a lot of focus put on capabilities and ability to deliver, and the means to actually sort of win that level of trust within the clients. So, and does the distance make a difference to that? To some degree, yes, but it's still very much a case of putting your capabilities up and out there, and talking about the clients with the match with their real needs, and understanding the realities, the commercial realities that lie between that to make it happen. So there's an element of that. And this is where the experience within those markets, really does start coming through, is where you feel that you can provide that honestly and sincerely, and or whether you feel it's potentially not a mix for you. So clients come to us for a range of reasons. They'll be referred from stakeholders. They'll be referred from other startups that the network might be closely working with. And we'll chase them. We'll actually be out there trying to chase down leads in a lot of these markets as well too. But the process of actually overcoming that element of a local entity versus an overseas entity that might be on the other side of the world, as I said, the barriers are coming down from a logistics perspective. But you still have the normal complications that you just have to address one by one to actually get a client to get a client out of a potential opportunity.
Yeah, and I think my own personal lived experience with it as well, having worked in the U.S. and in coming out of an Australian company doing work in the U.S. and in Southeast Asia, one of the things that always struck me when I was in the U.S. is that the product development companies there, many of them are so large because of the scale of opportunity with some of the big product development organizations and MedTech companies. They don't typically, or they very often don't work with startups. You really find it a struggle to work with startups without large commitments up front. And I was told that any number of times when I was working there, and that means that the ecosystem we have here, that, as Matthew and all of us have kind of pointed out, is very user-friendly towards the startup community and really understands that space, because Australia has got a lot of startups and supports, et cetera. We become a very user-friendly place to come and settle in and welcome. So you're not treated as a pariah because you're a startup. You're actually welcomed in and into a space that is used to working with early stage companies. So now, before I go on I know we were going to extend that question on to some others, but I actually have Mayank Gurnani on, and Mayank, I'd really like to give Mayank a few minutes of time. And Mayank is we heard from him briefly in the last session and wanted to give him a little bit more time to share because he overviewed the Jumpstart program and how that comes together. That's the joint, it's the Joint University MedTech Product Startup Program, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, almost.
Almost. Close enough. You can correct me later. But he and I, for quite a long time, explored the connecting of the two ecosystems, and I thought it was worth furthering that discussion a little bit more today in a little bit more granular detail about what companies they're expecting, what they're looking for from a connection point with the Australian ecosystem and Victoria and the ecosystem. And this was just an opportunity to look at that in a little more granular detail because of the, Mayank, you not only work with Jumpstart, but you're integrated into a huge variety of different ecosystems or sectors. And so you really have a different point of view about what's needed beyond the Jumpstart program. And so I'd love to just hear that and explore that with you a little bit today. So thank you very much for joining on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I had another one earlier, but glad to be here. I totally echo Jeff's comments. And Jeff, please feel free to step in. I know other folks here who have been involved in the ecosystem, Gary Haywood and Amrish Nair. We have worked closely on various projects, and Singapore and the Australian ecosystem well as well. So please feel free to chip in. I'll just give a quick introduction for those who don't know me yet. My name is Mayank Gurnani. I operate the Jumpstart NUS program, which is like Jeff said, is a joint university MedTech program. The name says it all. It works across the universities, the large universities, NUS, NTU, SUTD, to actually accelerate the commercialization of MedTech solutions coming from the university and the university hospitals. As a university program, we do see a range of very early stage projects coming in. So we are embedded inside the university ecosystem. We look at researchers, we look at new projects coming in, which are sort of utilizing the university's ecosystem to accelerate, to get themselves to the marketplace. And we also then see projects which have been successful and continue contributing into the university's ecosystem as they grow wings and fly away from here. So I've been with the Singaporean ecosystem since 2015 when I moved here. Before that, I used to work as a corporate venture investor with a mid-sized pharmaceutical company called Cipla in India. And before that, I used to work as a strategy manager at Novartis. So I have spent close to 20 years either as a clinician or as inside the venture area, building startups. And I feel that the Singaporean ecosystem is a unique ecosystem compared to what I've seen back home in India and in the US and Europe, where I worked earlier. It's unique in the sense that the market is small, first of all. The tech talent layer is on steroids. The grant funding and the research push from the government is extremely high. The inherent culture of the Singaporean ecosystem is conservative in the sense that people are actually looking for jobs rather than build companies. So the world environment is drastically changed since the ecosystem started focus on biomedical back in 2000. So first investments in the biomedical area took place in the 2000s, focusing on manufacturing and nanotechnology at that time. And now it has evolved considerably, and precision engineering and medical technology has basically become a dominant area in this ecosystem. So the needs of the ecosystem therefore have evolved from earlier. Previously, it would just be okay for the government to release grant funding, and it still happens. People do receive a lot of grant funding, but it has also dawned on startup entrepreneurs and innovators. It's not just about receiving grant funding and going to a pitch competition and getting sort of into the PR circle, PR rounds. It's also important to build product as they go on, and it takes time and effort to do it. So what I have seen over the past 5 years is that entrepreneurs have desisted from going on to another grant cycle from the ecosystem, but have rather focused on getting out of Singapore and getting the markets and getting the customer validation, the customer interfaces outside, and also clinically getting more exposed to cultures and the way where medicine is practiced. So one example is that for most of us from a Commonwealth background, medical doctors who have trained in the British erstwhile British system, we have a much more conservative way of treating patients compared to those who have been trained in the American system. So the American system takes a much more, pardon me, Jeff, it takes a much more cowboy point of view. So they nuke first and ask questions later, and that's the way clinical work has progressed there. Whereas in the Asian context, it is first do no harm. It's a very conservative way of looking at treating people. But there has been a lot of talk about Singapore being like Asia. I will tell you, Singapore is absolutely not like Asia. It is from a medical point of view, my belief is that it's like a utopian ecosystem which provides a lot of support. There's a lot of different pathways available. What is not available is perspective from other markets. What is not available is clinical inputs from other markets. What is not available is a new thinking, a new way of doing things. And I think the Australian ecosystem, which has also co-developed over the period of this time, and we have seen some large companies come out, many small companies come out, and we have seen the ecosystem itself getting being moving forward over a period of time. I feel that there is a lot of learning which can happen across this, and I've talked this to everybody who comes down from Australia. Even in my trip, my trip with in 2017-18, when I met Buzz Palmer at that time, I had said the same thing, and in a couple of years, Buzz also opened offices here in Singapore, and I feel that that's the way to go. For Australia, it's due north. So China is due north. Singapore is due north, Japan is due north, India is due north. So that's the way. For Singapore, it's all across. So companies might focus on, depending on the solution and depending on the market that they find, they might focus on Australia. And if they go to Australia, there is a bunch of opportunities which I feel are there. One is the R&D tax rebate for sure. But more importantly is the openness and of the ecosystem to actually help them grow and find where to go. I see there's a sort of a healthy competition between the Victorian ecosystem and the New South Wales ecosystem and the Queensland ecosystem, at least on this side, compared to, I've been in touch with people on the Western Australian side, where I don't feel that there is as much competition. They are the only ones around. So you either work with them or you go to Adelaide. So I feel that I feel that there is a benefit of engaging with the ecosystem for both sides. I have always propagated. Jeff knows this very well. Gary knows this as well. I've always propagated a staff which frequently visits Singapore. From the Australian companies, whether it's the clinical research companies, whether they are the pharmaceutical companies, I mean, they should think of Singapore as another place to another location to expand the business and to keep coming back and forth. I feel there's an Asian side to it, in the sense that it takes relationships to build it. It won't happen. You won't get business right on the first time you land here. It won't happen immediately, but you basically set up your own sort of niche, and you build it over a period of time. And I find that those who have sort of built those networks over a period of time, then they, even if they move on to new roles, new opportunities, they continue to reap benefits from those activities. In the long run, it's about human connect. It's about human relationships, and I feel that that's where the inherent strength of coming down and speaking. If it takes doing a couple of speaking relationships, if it takes doing a couple of low value pilots, if it takes having a Singaporean office or a co-working space, if it takes becoming a partner to a university and saying, we will dedicate office hours, whatever it takes to actually, do a little bit of ecosystem building, I would think it would go a long way in developing the goodwill and getting people to know your niche and your area that you're working in. So I'll stop here. I know I've been rambling for 10 minutes, but I feel that there is a lot of potential, and I look forward to meeting you guys when you're here.
Thank you, Mayank. And yeah, it's when we talk about the Singapore ecosystem, I mean, the Singapore, my experience again with it was is really not just people from Singapore, it's people from all over the region, all over the world. I mean, it was the United Nations when you went to those into the area where there were, the startup hubs and Block 71 and all those places. And which, by the way, if anybody on the trade mission gets to go and eat at the area in that, go get that experience. You cannot walk away from having lunch there without going, oh, the whole world's here.
So if you guys are coming down here, I feel that you should get a lay of the land. I don't know if, Jeff, you have covered what is the lay of the land here? What is the topography of what happens there? Have you talked about it?
We haven't in great deal. I'd love to spend a couple minutes on that.
Okay. So let me say this out. There are individuals who originate the ideas and the concepts which actually go forward. These ideas and concepts, especially in the biomedical world, are coming from the universities, A*STAR, and the hospitals, right? So if you get a picture of this, we call them research performers. These are guys who receive research grants from the government to actually conduct research, right? So that is one pocket of things. Then we have a bunch of what we call enablers. These are guys who actually help in translation of this research out. So it's like the tech transfer offices. It's like the A*STAR enterprise unit. It's like Enterprise Singapore. It's like EDB, NHIC. These and even Jumpstart. These are sort of organizations which are actually looking at early stage research and saying, hey, this sounds like a good idea. I'm going to put the first dollar in and I'm going to help you guys grow from here. That's step two. Then there is a group of people who actually put money downstream from these guys. Those are angel investments. Those are crowdfunding websites. Those are family offices. Those are institutional investors. They all step into that. That is a bunch of those in that area, and there is an overlap for one particular entity which works both ways, which is Trendlines, which is both an enabler as well as an investor, which puts its own money and also enables at the same time. So that's one. Its own money, not somebody else's money, right? So I know MedTech Actuator is here, but MedTech Actuator is also sort of an overlap, but you guys know about it already. And then you go further downstream. There are the large companies which have either regional or local headquarters here, or have manufacturing units, or have some kind of big presence, large presence here. Large presence being more than 100 employees within Singapore at any time. So these includes the likes of J&J, BD, GSK, Eli Lilly, Novartis. They are large companies which hold the large office here. They run their own programs to actually choose and scout for projects to come in and grow in cooperation with the company or in co-optation with the companies. So just to get a sense of this, and then in terms of the for those who have not been to Singapore at all, let me just say bulk of this activity is actually in central Singapore. So it's the southern. If you imagine Singapore like a diamond, then the bottom southern part is where all of these things sort of converge. All of these things are coming together. So it's sort of like the Block 71, which Jeff was talking about, is next to A Star, is next to NUS, it's next to NUHS. It's like that area is abuzz with all these kind of activities. And if you are thinking of opening an office or having a co-working space when you're here, that's the place you want to set up. If your target is early stage projects, if your target is late stage, projects which are coming out and going out, then those investors, those offices are probably in the CBD, and then that is the area you want to target. If you're looking for example, if your target is large multinational companies, and a bunch of those biomedical manufacturing is actually happening out west. So it's an area called Tuas and Jurong, where all of these things are located. There's a big JTC MedTech hub. There's a full building, full block of just chock-a-block with different things happening at the same time. So that's another sort of idea to you. And then I just want to lastly finish with local Singaporean service providers and vendors who are based here. And there is a consortium of service providers and vendors which help us. They have units both in Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia and Bintan, Batam, in Malaysia, different locations who sort of have offices here and also help us. So they are sort of sprinkled all across the island. They're all over. So if you are sort of pipelining projects, a good way is to talk to these guys and see where you guys can collaborate and where you guys can build the opportunity to either pipeline projects or pass projects down to them. You can choose which way you want to operate. If you are, a university, then you're probably looking at an early stage like us, at researchers as your primary stakeholders feeding you projects, and then startups and investors as your secondary stakeholders who basically take these projects and develop them out. So sorry for taking away your spice, Jeff, but I just wanted to make sure people have a sense of a lay of the land, so they can. It helps a mental map of, at least for me, it helps before I go into a city to get a sense of what's happening where, so I can develop my itineraries, my meetings, and my engagements around it, and then I start slotting things into different boxes.
Great. Listen, Mike, that was. Couldn't have imagined a better way to finish off the session today. Really painted a much clearer picture, and that's really what I mean. That brings to a head the reason we had this session today was to be able to provide that more granular picture for people to engage through this trade mission. Like I said, whether they're going next week or they're going to go next month, or they're engaging virtually through and connecting. That really helps paint a really much clearer picture, and thank you for that. And unfortunately that actually we're pretty much got to the end of our session today. So thanks again to all of our speakers for all of your insights and contribution. As you've already heard, we've got this new initiative coming up, which is WILAM, WILAM. Please sign up and www.wilam.com. You can go on and register, and as soon as you've registered in and the platform goes live on or about November 1st, you'll start to get information how you can get your account set up. And again, that's free. What's next in the trade mission? We do have next week, and we're going to have a Q&A session here. We're going to take about a 5-minute break after we wrap up, just to allow us to move everyone into a live session. So stay on the same link. And we're going to be getting everybody together for that. And that session is going to be really introducing you to some of the InvestVic and GlobalVic players, and having a Q&A session more broadly about the trade mission next week. So stay tuned if you want to be participating in that. And once again, thank you everyone who participated and is online today. A recording of the event will be shared with all registered attendees post-event, and again, later will be put into our website, so you can go and find that. And that concludes our second trade mission event. We hope to see you at our third, and have a wonderful day. And for those joining us next week, we'll see you next week, but stay online. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and I'll see you on the other side. For any that are joining us, we're going to be moving you over into the broader room. So see you in 5 minutes.